Doreen has increasingly become a good friend of mine. I am a big supporter of the ITU. Doreen, well, I'm going to ask her in a minute to tell you, if you don't know, what the ITU is and what the Telecommunication Development Bureau that she runs is. But one of the things you should know is it's a UN agency, one of the oldest. It predates the UN by a very long time and was folded in. But she is in an elected position, which means the countries of the world have to choose to put her in that position. She is a pioneer in a number of ways. She's the first woman to ever hold an elected position in the ITU in its 100-and-some-year history. But that's not the only thing. She is unusual to be an American in a high elected office in the United Nations. That is really quite unusual these days. And that just goes to show that she's a real diplomat, and she's been in government service for her pretty much entire career. She's been at the ITU since I think 2008. Is that it, Doreen? In any case, longer than that. Okay. Well, what is the ITU and what is the Telecommunication Development Bureau that you run?
Well, thank you. Thank you, David, and great to be here. So the ITU is the International Telecommunications Union, dates back to 1865. As you said, we're pretty old. We date back to the telegraph. And of course, we were created when the European countries got together to try to figure out how you could move telegraphic messages from one country to the next. And so really, we were created with, I would say, connectivity at our core. We have three main sector areas. So we have our spectrum radio communications sector, we have our standardization sector, and then we have the development sector, which is the fun part that I lead. We're based in Geneva, 13 offices around the world, and really our mission is all about connectivity. So trying to get out there and connect those unconnected that need us so much right now.
So your agency, the group that you run at the ITU, is specifically devoted to essentially the theme of this conference, which is how to become more digitally united. And that is really why we have you here. Thank you for that. I notice you have the Sustainable Development Goals right at your shoulder, which is very appropriate. We are, as you know, huge supporters of these this set of targets for the world for 2030. Talk about why they matter to you and what they have to do with the work that you're doing.
Great, and I'm wearing my pin as well, David, my SDG wheel. Well, you know, it's hard to talk about this without thinking about what COVID has done as well. So, you know, putting the COVID lens on, I think it's pretty clear that digital technologies are and can serve as a really powerful accelerant of social and economic transformation. And I think that digital can help us to overcome these long-standing development barriers. And when we look at each and every one of those 17 goals, digital has a key component, whether we're talking about healthcare, about education, agriculture. I mean, digital is going to help us in our recovery, and digital is going to help us get there if we have a chance to really achieve those 17 goals by 2030.
It's interesting too, the Sustainable Development Goals were agreed to in 2015, which is now 6 years ago. I know the ITU at the time was a strong proponent for making one of the goals be connecting the world, extending universal internet connectivity. And it wasn't. I think if it were done today, it probably would be, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. We tried to push for SDG 18, the goal on connectivity. Some people like to say it should have been SDG 0, so sort of the hole in the wheel, like in the donut, because it is linked to every single goal. And at the end of the day, we only got 4 specific references in the goals. So in education, in gender, in the infrastructure, and of course in the partnership piece. But regardless, we carry on and we try to show good examples of how connectivity and digital solutions can be accelerants for each of those goals.
So when you look at the big picture of global connectivity, where do we stand? I mean, it's not a pretty picture really in terms of bringing the world society together digitally, is it?
No, it's not a pretty picture. Well, we're half connected. It's a glass half full. We have 3.7 billion people that are still not connected to the internet. And then we have to sort of add to that, I would say the hundreds of millions of more people that are not sufficiently connected. And when I say not sufficiently connected, I mean that their connectivity may be too expensive, maybe too slow, or maybe simply not accessible. So it's really half the world and more that don't have sufficient connectivity. And we need to also look at that household connectivity. When we look at developing markets, our data shows us that only about half of the households in the developing world have home internet access, which has been a huge challenge when we think about COVID, when we think about school closures, and not having that connectivity and what it's done to those learners that have been deprived of basically a whole year of school. So yeah, I mean, it's not great news. And on top of it, we estimate that it would take some 428 billion to connect those unconnected. So I think, David, we have a lot of work to do.
Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about the nature of your work and how you're going about trying to do that?
Well, we have a number of exciting programs, I would say. One of the key areas in which we work is on the regulatory front, because I think if you have a great connectivity project, if you have an infrastructure project, anything linked to connectivity, if you don't have that right enabling framework in place, it's not going to be sustainable. So we bring the world's regulators, including the FCC and others, together annually. We look at challenging topics. We work together to develop best practices, and we really try to support regulators around the globe to use best practices. We advocate for collaborative regulation across sectors and countries, and we really try to help put in place that regulatory framework, which is so essential. The other thing we do is we bring together multi-stakeholder groups, and David, you've been part of many of these in our Road to Addis series. We also have our Broadband Commission for Sustainable Development, which I think is a great example of a multi-stakeholder gathering of thought leaders that come together and look at the latest challenges and try to construct and craft best practices and ways forward.
Yes, and I know you led that Broadband Commission for some time. So when you talk about regulation and how it can help and regulatory attitudes, is there any sort of one thing that you would like to see more countries do? Maybe especially including the United States, since that's where most of the people watching today live. What about that?
So I mean, I think my message to all regulators is to put the unconnected front and center. We know even in the United States, lots of stories about young people having to go in front of Starbucks to get their Wi-Fi hotspot to be able to continue their schooling. So really to think about smart regulations, the right regulations that are going to bring the investment and that can actually get the connectivity to those that need it most. So that would be my recommendation.
Do you think most countries are going in the right direction with that? Have they gotten the memo? I mean, I think countries all know they need to connect their citizens, but are they, you know, I know, for example, Kenya just recently introduced a digital services tax, which is not probably the direction that you ought to go when everybody's leaning more on the internet during the pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, David, generally the memo has been somewhat redrafted because of the urgency and the critical nature of connectivity. We set up very early on something that we call Reg for COVID. It's this network resilience platform that we put up to invite the private sector, regulators, policymakers, civil society to come forward and tell us what were they doing to maintain connectivity and actually get connectivity out to the unconnected. And I would say what was so incredible was the kind of camaraderie amongst stakeholders, the creativity, and the amazing things that countries, government, policymakers, regulators put in place to get through the sort of normal, difficult bureaucratic loopholes to really transform and get that connectivity out there. And I think there's lots of things that we saw that were done in response to COVID that we would hope might live on in the sort of post-pandemic new normal, which I hope comes soon.
Well, it is true that the urgent centrality of digital connectivity to getting by in life has impressed itself on ordinary citizens and leaders in a way it never had before. And I want to get back to this mindset shift a minute, which we began a little bit of this at the beginning in a minute. But you mentioned businesses, and one of the things that distinguishes the ITU inside the UN, which I don't think most of our viewers likely know, is that it's the only UN agency that has always had businesses as members. And I think that idea probably has more pertinence than ever, and probably should be, in my opinion at least, followed in plenty of other parts of the UN and other organizations as well, of course. But how do you think about this idea of business and government partnering together, particularly at the global transformation level, but also within individual nation states?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think, well, we have to work together when we think about this 3.7 billion people unconnected. No one agency, no one company, no one government can do it on its own. So that working together is absolutely fundamental. And what is unique, as you just noted about the ITU, we are an international intergovernmental UN organization with 193 member states. And we also have these 800, we call them sector members, private sector members that participate in the ITU, civil society, academia as well. And in their participation, they are at the table. They can contribute, they can speak, they can work with us to develop technical standards, to help develop recommendations. They have a voice, and that is quite unique, as you said, in the UN system. And I think we're quite fortunate to have such a multi-stakeholder makeup.
Yeah, and just talk about some of the things that are happening. I mean, partnerships, I happen to know quite a bit about your partnerships, and there's two of them in particular that, I mean, GIGA is one that I know you're deeply involved with. You might just quickly tell people what that is as an indicator of the kind of priorities that you guys are setting.
Yeah, well, GIGA is a great one that I'm super passionate about. So GIGA is an initiative that we joined up with UNICEF. It's about school connectivity. Our ambition is to connect every school on the planet to the internet and every young person to information, opportunity, and choice. And David, as you know, connecting every school in the world is something that world leaders decided to do back in 2003 and 2005 when we had this World Summit on the Information Society. And fast forward 15 years, it didn't happen. And there's this urgency around school connectivity, especially because of COVID. So we view the school not just as connecting young people, but as a hub for community connectivity. We have structured this partnership in different pillars. So the first piece is the mapping pillar. And it might seem, well, why do you need to do that? And actually, it's surprising that not every country knows where all their schools are, and they also don't know which schools are connected. So that mapping piece is a critical component where we have the ITU traditional infrastructure maps and the UNICEF more AI-based mapping tools that we've put together on the mapping piece. Then we have the connectivity piece. So it's about the technologies. We have our new last mile connectivity solutions guide that we're super excited about. We have the finance piece, which of course is absolutely critical, and we're exploring lots of new and exciting ways to tackle the financing issue. We're inspired by Gavi, the Gavi Alliance, where they pooled demand for vaccines, and that was how they were able to construct the financing mechanism. We're trying to pool demand for connectivity, aggregate it to help make the financing actually sustainable. And then the fourth piece is the empowering piece, and that's where once you're connected, you actually get all those incredible tools, learning tools that will empower and enable you.
And what's the role of business in GIGA?
So, well, it's open for business participation. We have Ericsson was our first key private sector contributor. They come in with a couple million to support us each year. They're very focused on the mapping piece. We have the Musk Foundation that also just joined us, and we're looking forward to other private sector inputs because we need sort of all hands on deck if we're going to get it done.
One of the things I wanted to just quickly ask you about, just in brief is we have a speaker tomorrow from SES. Steve Collar is the CEO of a giant global satellite company. When you look at this challenge, which is so vast and so urgent to get everybody connected, how do you think about satellites? And maybe what should I ask him tomorrow, or give me some ideas?
So tomorrow you're going to talk about satellites knitting your world together, which I love that. I love that theme. So Steve Collar, SES is a sector member. I just wanted to mention that. They're part of our work in the development sector, so it's great that they'll be joining you. I mean, satellites, of course, have a critical role. It's never going to be just about one single technology. It's always going to be about a blend of technologies. Some of that's going to be geographic considerations. So satellites will always continue to play a critical role. And it's interesting, some of the new work that SES has been focused on, bringing broadband to rural villages in Indonesia is one of their big focuses. So that's an exciting effort. And we look forward to working with them on some of their other rural connectivity projects. But I would say satellites,
okay.
It's a GEO, a MEO, a LEO. I mean, of course, the SpaceX stuff is with their Starlink constellation is another cool one, but definitely satellites are going to play a critical role.
I know you've put a particular emphasis in your work on gender advocacy, especially for women, and also on youth. Just talk about why those things fit into what would seem to be a sort of technical job that otherwise you would be doing.
Great. So on the gender front, I think it's maybe not entirely clear to everyone that there's this digital gender gap. So women are less connected. And when we look at the developing world, LDCs in particular, the least developed countries, only 1 in 7 women is connected to the internet. Wow. And of course, that lack of internet connectivity also sort of precludes them to have access to the wealth of opportunities that you can have by being online. So it's a problem, David. And also, I mean, I heard your previous speakers talking about women in the board. It's also a problem when we look at the tech sector. It's largely male dominated, especially in leadership positions. And when we look at creating and designing technology, we need to have women's representation at the table. So women in tech is a big issue. The other piece is digital skills. Women have less proficiency in terms of digital literacy and digital skills. So we're really trying to tap into those divides on the gender front and really get more women engaged in our work. And then on the youth side, because you asked about the youth side, I think that the youth focus, it's a critical one. Young people are, of course, natural and enthusiastic adopters of digital technology, but also it's because of the demographic. If we look at Africa, I think it's more than 60% are under the age of 25. That's the market that we really need to be tapping into because they're the future. And those young people having access to digital to create things, to change their communities, I think that's where we need to be focusing.
Well, I think what you've told us today is indicative of a real sea change that's happening at the UN in general, and in the global community more broadly. And I do think there is a major shift underway of recognition of the centrality of connectivity. But I also think you exemplify a new energy that's in UN agencies. And I don't think Americans often realize that that's even possible. So that's one of the many reasons I wanted to have you here today. I will continue to be a big partner in your Road to Addis Ababa sessions, because you're going to have a huge conference in November, the World Telecommunications Development Conference, which is a global gathering to just put this on the agenda even more aggressively. I'm so happy to help you with that. I'm so happy you were here today. So thank you, Doreen. It was really, really wonderful to talk to you.
Thank you, David. It was great to be here. Thank you so much.